That's who I am, committed man. Ain't no changing this union. It is God's plan. Through sickness and health, I will be content, committed man. When there is conflict, won't leave aside. I will be faithful every day of my life. When traveling on this pathway, things won't always be smooth. I give my reassurance, I'm devoted to you, committed man. That's who I am, committed man. Ain't no changing this union. It is God's plan. Through sickness and health, I will be content, committed man. Through sickness and health, I will be content, committed man.
Let me welcome all of you live here on YouTube for our Committed Men program forum. We have this forum once per quarter, and let me welcome all of you on set, those of you watching from near and from far. But at this time, we will have a special prayer. I ask that you just bow your heads at this time as we ask for the presence of God amongst us. Shall we pray? Gracious eternal Father, Master and King, we are grateful to you for life itself. As we are about to embark upon this very important subject and discuss important matters that will affect family, we ask, Lord, that your Spirit will lead and guide us. Thank you so much for taking us through the day. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Let me say the Family Ministry Department of the East Jamaica Conference, we talk about build lives and shaping destiny. And so let me, on behalf of my wife, Sister Genevieve, use this opportunity to bring greetings from the East Jamaica Conference Family Ministry Department, along with my admin assistant brother, Naisha Brown. The Conference Family Ministries Department recognizes and applaud the Committed Men, husbands to be exact, support group for staging this forum this evening. This, of course, is in an effort to provide needed information to husbands for the continuation, the strengthening of their marital relationship. And even for those who are not yet married, to get relevant information in order to prepare themselves for this special day. Your discussion this evening that we'll be discussing, the topic is the lawful husband. Of course, it's a discussion on sexual consent in marriage / marital rape, as well as sexual harassment that will be discussed. I am very happy that we have this evening some very esteemed panelists, ladies, 2 ladies and 1 gentleman, in the bodies of Kadria Folks, attorney at law, and Tavia Dunn, attorney at law, and also we have Pastor Michael Lewis. We are indeed delighted to have all of you this evening to, of course, discuss this very important subject. I believe that the subject to be discussed this evening will be useful and helpful in strengthening our marriages. I want to wish all of you on set or watching a godly sitting. Welcome to everyone. The scripture says, except the Lord build a house, those who labor will, of course, labor in vain. It also gives me the privilege and the great pleasure to welcome and to introduce to you our conference president, Pastor Merrick Walker, and his wife, Monica. Well, they certainly are wonderful support in family ministry. We want to welcome you, sir, you and your lovely wife to this forum. We know you have a word of greetings that you want to share with the audience online at this time. And so, Mr. President, I turn over to you. Of course, I know you want to greet your people and say a word of encouragement to them, to you. So welcome again, sir. And we hope all of us who are on set will, of course, have a wonderful evening. Over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brother Director, Pastor Adrian, and your wife, and the team of committed husbands. I greet you warmly. I am meandering my way home from morning. I went up almost to Newcastle, where we have a company that is thriving. It was indeed a good day. I am just anchoring that it was my expectation to be back where I could join you on camera from my home. Nonetheless, because of the importance of this occasion, I have chosen to stop by the way, and I claim the text that the angels of the Lord encamp round about them who fear him, the Lord, and will deliver. So it is really my joy to greet you on this forum, this platform, those who are on YouTube and Zoom watching from different parts of the conference, and no doubt from different parts of the world. The subject at hand is important. In the East Jamaica Conference, we have set as one of our priorities the matter of care, and in the marital relationship, there must be mutual care and understanding, zero tolerance for any form of disrespect and abuse, and we celebrate love, discussion, consent, mutual respect, and it is really commendable that we are having this forum tonight. And I pray that on the continuum of perspectives, we will find our rightful place based on the Bible and the guidance of the Holy Spirit in our hearts. I welcome our special guests and presenters. We know that you have, over the years, developed and highlighted critical answers to issues. And we trust your judgment, and we will listen very analytically and attentively, so that having listened and having participated, we will leave more informed and more decisive. And if we have in the past gone overboard, well, this is the time to restore ourselves to where we ought to be. So I wish you well. Let's go with the discussion, and I am certain enhanced tonight, and we will leave edified. And not only for ourselves will we glean information, but where we sit as leaders, as husbands, as men, we will guide others along the path of what is best. God bless you. And on behalf of the administration of East Jamaica Conference, Pastor Melvin Francis, our secretary, Elder Michael Porteous, our treasurer, Pastor Carl Cunningham, our vice president, and all the other leaders, full endorsement. Let not the show, the discussion begin. God bless you.
All right, let me introduce to you now Brother Garfield Goldburn, who will now take over as the moderator. So we ask Brother Goldburn to just go ahead at this time.
A very pleasant evening to you all. It is an exciting evening this evening. We thank you for being here. We thank you for your presence. You could have been elsewhere, but this evening is an evening that you would not want to miss, because we are here this evening to discuss some pertinent issues. Of course, if you have just joined, you have joined the platform of the East Jamaica Conference, and this is the Committed Husbands, the Committed Husbands Committee. I am the coordinator for the conference, and we are here to talk about issues which certainly affect you. Generally, as it relates to committed husbands, our position and what we seek to do is to enhance the development, the self-development of our husbands. In this case, it is going to be a discussion which will impact both the wife and the husband, because we will be speaking about the Sexual Harassment Act, and we will also be talking about consent in marriage, marital rape, real issues. And we want to look at things both from the law, as well as we will have the biblical support and doctrinal support that will also be here. With us this afternoon, this evening, our esteemed guests, as Pastor Johnson would have said earlier. And so I am going to introduce each. We have two attorneys, Miss Kadria Folks and Miss Tavia Dunn, Sister Tavia Dunn. And also we have Pastor Michael Lewis. So who are these people that we will be speaking to this evening? And before we do that, I want to once more greet those in YouTube land. Thank you for being here. And before you go any further, if you have not yet reached out to anyone for them to join, because this program will be speaking to not just you as a husband, not just you as a wife, but if you are a church member, you ought to be here. If you are an employer, you ought to be here. If you are an employee, you ought to be here, because we're speaking about, again, the recently effected Sexual Harassment Act, and of course, marital rape. All right, so encourage someone to get on board. Send the link to someone. So tell someone to reach out and join East Jamaica Conference YouTube page, and they will get on board with us. Okay, so Sister Tavia Dunn. Who is Sister Tavia Dunn? Sister Tavia Dunn is, and do forgive me, let me bring up her profile. You know, sometimes all the technology is, right? So let us bring this forward. All right, perfect. Here we go. All right, so Sister Tavia Dunn has been practicing as an attorney, having been called to the bar in the year 2000. She's a partner in Nunes, Schofield, Dillian and Company, and she's a member of the firm's litigation department. She has served as an adjunct lecturer at the undergraduate and postgraduate levels at Mona School of Business and Management. She's also a tutor in civil procedure and practice too at the Norman Manley Law School. Ms. Dunn is a member of the New Haven Seventh-day Adventist Church and the vice president of ASI East Jamaica Chapter. Thank you for being here, Sister Tavia Dunn. We appreciate you being here. And Sister Tavia will speak mainly to the issue of marital rape. Our other attorney is, yes, she's a good friend of mine, a good friend of the family as well, my wife and I. She is Miss Kadria Folks, And Ms. Kajria Folks is currently in civil private practice and has been practicing since 2006, mainly at the public bar. She has a passion for employment law, industrial relations practice, and policy. At the pinnacle of her career in public service, she was senior legal officer within the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, where she was instrumental in advancing the process for revisions to several labor laws. And, you know, she was very central. I'm very aware of that, in laying the groundwork for her niche practice area, occupational safety and health law. You could almost say she has pioneered that aspect in Jamaica. She also served as a member of the executive committee of the Jamaica Civil Service Association. In 2015, Ms. Folks was awarded Master of Labor Law and Relations by the University of Sydney Law School. And she's a part-time adjunct lecturer at UWI Mona, that is, where she teaches employment law and industrial relations. She serves the legal community as chairperson of the Industrial Relations Committee of the Jamaican Bar Association and member of the Publications and Law Reform Committee. Kajria, Ms. Folks, contributes to nation building as she is a director and chairperson of the Human Resource Committee of the National Family Planning Board, as well as director and deputy chairperson of the Human Resource Committee of the Bellevue Hospital. And I will say, you see her on our national stations, television stations, you hear her on the radio, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Kajria Folks. We thank you, Ms. Folks, as well for being here. And should I say the thorn among the roses? Pastor Michael Lewis. I will say Pastor Michael Lewis is a very humble man. He is married with children and is the pastor of the Hagley Park Seventh-day Adventist Church. And he has been pastoring for many years. Thank you, Pastor Lewis. Pastor Lewis will bring the position of the doctrine of the church as well as the biblical aspect to this evening's discussion. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. And so with that, we will proceed right into our discussion. First off, we will look initially at the Sexual Harassment Act, and then we will look on the marital rape, consent in marriage. We will look on that. Secondly, of course, persons who from the panel, while I may ask questions of specific panelists, if you wish to join in, if you wish to contribute, then certainly we will appreciate your input. For those persons who are on YouTube, continue to watch, and while you do, we certainly will entertain your questions. So while you have your questions, put them in the chat and we will certainly get them answered. There will be a segment as well later on down for other questions, but while you have the questions, send them and we will seek to incorporate as best as possible. Good evening again, as we're about to commence. Thank you for being here, and let's go with the first aspect, the Sexual Harassment Act. But before we do so, I'm going to ask the Lord to bless us once more. Lord Jesus, we thank you for this opportunity to discuss these issues. Be with us. Let wisdom prevail in our discussion, and persons will learn and share as we go throughout this program. This and other mercies we ask of you, dear Jesus, as we ask your presence to be with us right through. In Jesus' name, amen. Jamaica's Sexual Harassment Act was passed in 2021, but came into effect July 3, 2023. This legislation, by its nature, seeks to provide civil redress instead of a criminal focus for sexual harassment, particularly within institutions. Now, Ms. Kejuria folks, given you are looking centrally on the Sexual Harassment Act. Firstly, is the Sexual Harassment Act applicable to churches and their members?
All right, well, first of all, good evening, and thank you to you, Mr. Committed Husband Garfield, as well as to the conference for this invitation. So the short answer is yes. In the definition of an institution under the legislation, churches are not specifically mentioned. However, in terms of the category that speaks to schools and colleges and universities, that class of institutions could include a church, because a church is really an institution for religious instruction. So yes, churches are covered under the legislation.
Thank you very much. And of course, in support of that, based on what you were saying, Part 1, Section 21F, as you would have alluded to just now, says in this act, unless the context otherwise requires, institution is a place for the use of any facility by members of any organization. So certainly this supports what you have said for churches to be recognized under the Sexual Harassment Act. Now, secondly, how does the Sexual Harassment Act define sexual harassment?
Okay, so sexual harassment really refers to the making of an unwelcome sexual advance towards someone, as a result of which that person feels humiliated or offended, or in the context of work, it affects their productivity or creates a hostile work environment. Now, a sexual advance can be physical, such as touching someone, rubbing up on them. It can be verbal. So for instance, someone is asked for sexual favors, or there is a comment about somebody's body in a sexual way, or a promise that if sexual favors are given, then other favors will come. And it can also be nonverbal. So just showing explicit photos is a sexual advance. And if all of that is unwelcome, it's harassment.
Wow, we're getting into the flesh of it now. So there is an aspect of the act which says in the definition of sexual, which says any conduct, any conduct, act, or behavior. Could you give us a little more flesh on what is, you mentioned to some effect just now, but as it relates to the definition of conduct in sexual harassment act, under the act, how would you develop on that? What would you say is meant by conduct?
All right, so if you think of the end game, with sexual harassment, it's usually someone pursuing a romantic interest. So they have a romantic interest in someone and they're making overtures to get them to respond to that. No, the legislation is not trying to prevent people from conducting themselves in ways that show someone that they're interested. What the legislation is seeking to achieve in prescribing conduct is to avoid a situation where people feel coerced into giving into someone's romantic interest. And so if it is that, you know, someone, male or female, is interested in someone and they do something towards them that is welcome, you know, the other person is interested and, you know, they're following up on that, that's okay. The conduct that is problematic is where someone is aware through the other person's reaction, lack of reaction, nothing positive, you know, nothing to give you that energy to really continue, and you persist. So that's a conduct that the legislation is trying to encourage persons not to engage in. Now, in terms of the conduct can be one single act. So if it's severe enough, if it's you know, for instance, if you touch someone that's violating their space, you know, and their bodily integrity, that single act or conduct might be sufficient to constitute sexual harassment, or it can be a series of actions. So the conduct can be a singular action, or it can be a series of conduct. So, sometimes persons escalate things. They feel like, okay, if I express my interest and I'm not getting the response that I'm looking for, perhaps if I were to pursue and persist, I can press upon the person to, show me back some interest.
Well, we're going to get a little more into that later on, because we want persons to get the full understanding, and we want to break it down somewhat in a granular way, because there are expectations which comes with the act for individuals in the workplace, as well as for in an institution, members of an institution. So, church members need to understand this, and so we want to get into that in a little granular way. But you said something very pertinent. You said the very first act, without it being persistent, could be considered sexual harassment.
Yes, if it's severe enough. So, for instance, catcalling might not be severe, and that is simple. When Jamaican men like to, that might not be severe enough. But if you're gonna be touching someone, rubbing up on someone in a sexual way, then that might be severe enough to really constitute an act of sexual harassment.
I'm going to pause there because you went there before I wanted to. So I'm going to ask my technical team to play that video for me. Please play that video, and then we're going to come back to continue with the discussion.
Hey, one thing me really miss about being in Jamaica, and it used to be like so annoying when I was in Jamaica, and I demand them. Yeah, me not gonna lie to you. The attention me used to get from the man them. Now when you walk out of your house at Jamaica, no matter where you have on, you have a man that tell you say you look good. The man them are gonna say, Jano baby, my size, wagwan. So, yeah, when you move come to Canada, crickets, unless you live in like a neighborhood of black people there, but crickets, you start to feel, you say, Jano, them man the call to man. I know that some people are gonna say, oh, it's harassment. Sorry, more want little harassment. More want get harassed a little bit. Yeah, it feel little good when sometimes a man see you and him say, Jano baby, you look good. It feel good. Say you look good in but sometimes it's good to hear it. From somebody else, from the opposite sex, say you look good. Oh, I say crickets. But now you say look good at harassment. People that can't get arrested. No. But yeah, one thing about Jamaica, man, they might make you know you look good.
So this is somewhat the contrary position. So this person is this woman, this female, she's saying she would appreciate the catcalling when and the expressions of appreciation of how she looks. So going back to the catcalling that you mentioned earlier. So you said, Ms. Folks, that the catcalling on the street might not be strong enough. That's rather interesting. So say you are at church and someone is doing the catcalling or so, or even in the workplace, and that is being done. Is it the same way that it is viewed? Is that sexual harassment? I know of women who, when they're speaking about this aspect, catcalling, they really don't appreciate it. They totally don't appreciate it. What are you saying as it relates to catcalling in, say, for example, in a church environment, in an institution recognized by the Sexual Harassment Act, which could be a church or in the workplace? What is a position on catcalling in those environments? How would you speak to that?
All right. So our experience of sexual harassment and what we consider to be sexual harassment has a lot to do with our cultural, I don't know if you want to call it construct. So for instance, as Jamaicans, we are just a little bit more open, generally speaking. And so the catcalling in the streets won't necessarily offend us, right? Now, having studied outside of Jamaica, I remember when I was in Australia, for instance, I had reason to ask somebody one day, how do you know when somebody's interested in you? When you go to the parties, nobody's not gonna come and dance with you, like in Jamaica or anything like that. What are the cues? And the person told me, oh, they would invite you for coffee. And I was like, oh, but I've been declining 100% of my coffee invitations, you know, because I'm from Jamaica where people are more open and, you know, you expect something more forthright. Now, with the catcalling in Jamaica, I don't know that a lot of persons will be offended by it because it's usually something that's very transitory. Like you just walk in and it's like a hail. So just acknowledge that you look good. But you're leaving the situation. You're not stuck in a situation where you have to deal with this every day, every minute, every hour, right? You just walk down the road. Mm-hmm.
What if you are offended? Does the act capture that as an offense? Or
so the catcalling is a hail to a woman by a man generally, where they try to get your attention. I think that in and of itself might be what you call de minimis. But if that is coupled with words that are provocative.
Sorry, while you and I may know that that term, break it down for, break down the legal term.
Yeah, like it doesn't amount to much. You know, it's something was done, but it's nothing, it's not that bad. You understand? Because as I said, it's a transitory situation. It happens a lot on our roads. But if that is coupled with words that are just vulgar and very suggestive and words that make you feel undressed, then you can understand where a reasonable person would be offended. But there might be persons who are offended by a catcall. Certainly at church though, because church is generally a conservative institution. And so the modicum of behavior or the standard of behavior has to be adjusted. The expectation is an adjusted expectation. So if something like that was to happen at church and you feel like, you feel offended, somebody greeting you like that, a brother, and you might want to take something like that to the elders because it would not be appropriate in church. Church is a very conservative institution. So a lot of things are contextual and a lot of sexual harassment is subjective. It's just a matter of whether or not how that person receive what has happened and if they feel sufficiently motivated to do something about it or have the behavior stop. When it comes to the tribunal hearing, that the tribunal is able to make an objective assessment.
Right, so we want to come to that, but we're going to come to that. But as I said, help me to bring it as granular as possible, because we're going to look at what are options available to persons on the premise of them feeling sexually harassed. But since we're on the point of the catcalling, can you develop some more on sexual harassment? According to the act, what does sexual harassment include? Because you mentioned catcalling supplemented with other verbal expressions could constitute same. No, can you speak to some more specific aspect? You mentioned some earlier, but as granular as you can get, please do.
All right, so with sexual harassment, you're looking for advances of a sexual nature. Things that people say or do that communicate that they have a sexual interest, right? That they wish to pursue. And that you're to be party to that. And that can look several ways. It can be, they go out of their way to make physical contact with you, like rub up on you in a very suggestive way. Or for instance, if you put your body in a certain position, you bend down, they're making comments. Or they will show you pornographic material, probably asking you what you like, that kind of stuff. Anything that someone will do or say that will give you a reasonable person the impression that they want to act out something with you. They want something, you know, express themselves sexually with you. Now, the issue with sexual harassment really is that it's about your right to sexual autonomy and your right to decide who you engage with sexually and how, right? So the problem with sexual harassment is that someone decides that they want to express themselves sexually with you. And it's almost as if you're not returning that intention or desire. It's like nothing to them. You know, it's like it doesn't really matter. They will just persist. They will coerce you. It's not about you submitting because you want to do this, you know, as you're entitled to. It's as if you don't have a right to not want this, right? And so that's in the most severe cases, because as I said, one act can be sufficient, one severe act. So if somebody's going to be slapping a woman on her rear, right? That in and of itself is offensive, right? And that is sufficiently severe for me to say, no, but you know, you crossed the line. But really and truly, it's really about sexual autonomy and the fact that individuals, male and female, in engaging, you know, someone might make a move and the other person can either step forward or step backwards. And that persons are to respect that reaction as opposed to seeing a step backward as an invitation to take up a challenge. Because that's where you will get into problem.
Okay, so first, I'm getting the impression that some aspect of it is really about personal interpretation. So you may feel a particular way. So the sexual harassment has also to do with the person on the receiving end of the action of the other party, because one person may do something and the other party may be okay and another may not be. So it's really somewhat subjective in terms of how you respond. Very interesting. And if I may add to some of development and some of what you have said, which was rightly done. Any promise of a benefit or a reward based on a compliance to a sexual proposal. Continued, and you mentioned this one, are repeated commentaries about a person's body or body parts. Continued criticism about a person's body or body parts. And I want to come there. So, Pastor, I'm going to ask you a question very shortly. But I want to put something to Miss Folks along this line. But let me finish reading some of the other specifics. The use of offensive sexual languages, any display of pornographic material, which you also mentioned, and any persistent unwanted social invitations. Forgive me to go there, but in recent time, there was a particular expression on social media of a minister who mentioned the body parts of another female. And while I'm speaking in parable, if I, going back to the aspect that says continued criticism about a person's body or body parts, because I remember, based on what I recall, that particular female minister would have mentioned the body parts of the unnatural body part. It is presumed of another female. And my question is, would that constitute sexual harassment? Say, for example, people in church and they're talking about somebody's body part. It could be of the same gender, same sex, and you say, you know, you make comments about somebody's body part in a disparaging way. Based on the Sexual Harassment Act, Ms. Folks, would that constitute, and it says continued criticism about a person's body or body parts, would that constitute sexual harassment? Because we are here for knowledge, We're here to understand the act would have come into effect July 3, fairly fresh. We want persons to understand what it is that it is about. Would that constitute sexual harassment?
No, it would not. No, because the end game with sexual harassment is always it's like a romantic outcome that the person wants. So if somebody's just criticizing you for the sake of criticizing you, like they don't like your body, you know, or they think things are not proportioned right, or whatever the case is, that's not a sexual thing, that's not like an appreciation for your body and telling you how your body can be of satisfaction to them. It's something different. So that in that situation, that would not have been sexual harassment. It might have been harassing conduct of a different nature, such as bullying, but that would not be sexual harassment.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for clearing up that. Now, Pastor, not exclusive to any church, but there are at times, Pastor Lewis, there may be complaints that brothers are greeting the sisters with unholy hugs and handshakes, the rubbing of the hands and so on. It is said that there are some who love to readily initiate the hugs and the kisses on their church brethren. And in response, many of the church sisters will say they don't like that and they feel harassed. And they may, the gentlemen may find themselves in problems with this legislation accordingly. Now, Pastor, how would you counsel regarding physical sexual harassment in the church environment, or even for persons at the workplace?
All right, thank you so much for having me online, and let me just greet. As you are aware, I'm actually commuting, but I can still relate. As was mentioned earlier, critical to the definition. Church has been church is a community of individuals who oftentimes would fellowship. Fellowship is a critical part, is a key component of worship and a worship community. Notwithstanding that, in light of the Sexual Harassment Act, one has to be cautious about one's, approach. But the point is that if the church is accustomed to a socializing culture of greeting one another, hugging and so on, if somebody in that community feels violated, according to what I heard earlier about defining the act, it would suggest it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who initiated the hugging and so on was intentional about making sexual advances. The person can do it out of pure motive, and the individual on the receiving end still finds it offensive. In a case like that, once the person registers discomfort, then my counsel, my recommendation is that you should desist. Based on the definition for the act, or how it was defined or explained, persistence from the person would register that the individual is intentional about sexual advances. So I would counsel against this kind of imposition of oneself upon another. I would counsel against that, whether in the workplace or in the church community. If somebody comes to me as a pastor registering disgust about such an encounter, I would definitely, discourage that and caution and counsel against it. You might have other individuals in the church community who is quite okay with an embrace, but you can know when an embrace has gone overboard. You can know that. I mean, pressing the body onto somebody else's body. But what the practice has been in recent times, and I know you may have met upon that, is that people embrace each other kind of sideways to avoid the contact with the person's body from a frontal perspective. So as I said, I would counsel and caution against that kind of embrace, and especially if the person registers discomfort. I am listening, and forgive me, I am listening to the attorney's perspective, and you will appreciate though that a number of that based on the act, anybody can come up with a charge on another. And so it strikes me that critical to this entire act and its implications is that one has to prove. And I'm awaiting, I'm listening, because I'm sure maybe we'll get there. How does one prove? Right. How does one prove? And another thing, you will find persons will give you an anecdotal situation. Look here, if I didn't persist, you see, I wouldn't get your mother. A parent talking to a parent talking to, from the older days. There. Good. So, but I want to ask the question. I want to ask the question if I'm permitted. And the question is, when the act was being formulated, from what vantage point was the act pursued? Is it from the female's vantage point? Because I know, and I suspect you may have this in your questioning, are males experiencing sexual advances too that are inappropriate? And do we have a context where the male can register that, look here, I just experienced this, and will be treated, seriousness and urgency as they would treat with the woman's situation, notwithstanding the prevalence on the woman's part? That's a question I would ask, but I don't know if you will permit that at this time.
Yes, we can have Miss Folks answer it, but just, I mean, if I were to just say, the act is not biased. So it is across the board for male, for female. So if a man has an issue with being harassed in the whatever institution, then he can make a claim. He can file a report, and as it relates to damages, because it is less about criminalizing the person and more about a civil response. So, Ms. Folks, you can give your legal.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that question, Pastor. So let me give you the long answer. So sexual harassment is what you call a type of discrimination based on sex. And so the response to it has to acknowledge the fact that it's something that can be experienced by men and women equally. Therefore, the legislation does contemplate a situation where a victim is male or female. And I've had situations where in the employment context where the person who is harassed is actually male. So the legislation is quite balanced. And if you realize that it's owned by the ministry with responsibility for gender affairs, which recognizes the fact that it's one of those forward-thinking legislation whereby there's no battle between the sexes. It just recognizes that this is an issue that can arise in the social engagement that occurs between men and women. And so, yes, men can be victims of sexual harassment, and they too can access redress under the legislation. Garfield, if I may mention something that Pastor alluded to about if there's a complaint. Now, what I find interesting, because I read the manual that you sent to me, and I found it quite interesting. I think the approach taken by the church will be consistent with all, Bible-based religious institutions, where they said first you must take biblical counsel on how to deal with an issue. So if you are offended by...
Yes, Ms. Folks, and I certainly appreciate that. You're a true attorney. So you would have gone and done your due diligence as it relates to the church manual. And we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're definitely going to get there because we want to hear what is the church's response generally on these situations. And Pastor Michael Lewis is rearing and ready to go at that point. So we're going to get there. So definitely. So as you have said just now, that male and female, there is no bias as it relates to the act. And so it is important for persons to understand that if a man feels he is sexually harassed by either gender, then he can make a complaint. And yes, even if he feels he is sexually harassed by a woman, that is okay. The act recognizes that, and you can seek to deal with it, right? And Pastor would have mentioned some approaches, best practice. You know, for example, you know, if I may say, because I keep hearing that women complain about the hand rubs, the overextension of the hand rubbing, you know, on the shoulders. So, you know, men, it might be best to cool down on some of those. But Miss Folks, let's look quickly on the psychological and emotional harassment, which is registered in Section 4, first schedule of the Sexual Harassment Act. Can you speak to that aspect, the psychological, emotional harassment? And then I'll put a question to Pastor after that.
You're talking about the toxic work, the hostile work environment? In the workplace context?
Not quite, but what would the sexual, you know, the persistent proposals, I think you mentioned a couple of those, the unwelcome requests, the unwanted invitations to go out on dates, the insults, the taunts, the innuendos of a sexual nature. Based on the first schedule, it says, you know, psychological and emotional harassment registers there. So let me put this question to Pastor. Here's a single church brother, Pastor, and I think you started along that line. And this person now wishes to get married and see someone he considers as a prospective wife. On the premise that society, and you mentioned it, teaches that a woman putting up resistance is the trajectory to travel for her to be seen as a good catch. In other words, society says the woman not being an easy catch, that is what should happen, right? The woman should put up resistance. Therefore, Pastor, with this in mind, if a man is rebuffed by a woman he sees as a wife prospect, but thinking that him continuing is what the woman wants and what society wants, and he persists, could this approach spell sexual harassment and a breach of Sexual Harassment Act for an innocent man who merely is following societal conventions to win a woman? So before you answer, Pastor, let me drop this back to Miss Folks. Would this be sexual harassment? The man thinking that if the woman rebuffs him is a part of the game and he continues based on psychological emotional harassment, how would you express on this in relation to sexual harassment? And then Pastor, I'll come back to you. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Right. So I'm saying that based on the language of the legislation, it's really taking a victim-centered approach, because if you look at the definition, it says unwanted, unwelcome sexual advance, right? So it's therefore highlighting and underscoring that what is relevant is how the conduct is received and not necessarily how it's given. So it's, as you know, sexual harassment, because the person who is the perpetrator has a sexual interest, it's not coming from a bad place. It's not coming from an innocent place. It's not necessarily a bad place. It's just that the person on the receiving end can choose whether or not to receive that. And if they choose not to receive it, it becomes a problem. If they choose to receive it in that situation, you have a wedding soon. But if they choose not to receive it, which is they have a right to, you might have a disciplinary matter arising because somebody might feel, but no, man, or you know, worse, sometimes people might say they feel like this is their person, you know, like, you know, I don't even want to suggest that anybody might tell like one God and say, God, tell them, you understand? But they feel a strong conviction that this is supposed to be their person. You know, it'd be interesting to see how the church would deal with something like that because the other person didn't, you know, God didn't tell them. You understand? So they're rebuffing you because they are waiting to hear from God. But you're persisting because you're sure you heard from God. You know? These are the things in the churches. This is always going to arise in the church. Eh?
Boy, I'm telling you, you know, so it is, you know, so many subjective positions because it comes back to how the receiver interprets it, and then that could create issues. So, Pastor, you know, right along that line, because you started along, how would you advise such a prospective suitor? You know, his father would have gone the route of long pursuing his mother, and so he gets rebuffed by someone he is trying to sway and continues, you know. But with the Sexual Harassment Act now into effect since July 3, 2023, you know, how would you advise this person in such an approach?
It's interesting. You know, this discussion is really becoming interesting and very provocative. I'm listening to you know, folks, and she has made a very valid point as she interprets the act. It's a question of how the receiver interprets the action. However, the point is that now that we are in this context, and notwithstanding how the person may have been socialized before, the reality is that the context does not make accommodation for that kind of socialization. And so what needs to happen is that the church needs to play a role in re-socialization. The church is actually an educational center, you know, and it's not quarantined from the context within which it is nestled. The church is actually in a context, the context of the world, you know, and while it is in the world, it has to still consider its environment as it ministers, and its ministry becomes relevant.
And to interject just,
yeah,
and to just make a short interjection to say this program in itself is one aspect towards educating the church community.
That's right. Very good. So the church has to. The church is that community that imports individuals with all kinds of worldviews and cultural socialization. And so in this one community, the role of the church is to do the work of reproving, rebuking, correction, much like what the scripture says, because the scripture is the tool. And so we're not quite opposed to what the legislation is seeking to accomplish. In fact, we should be working in tandem with them, with the legal fraternity, in ensuring that we have a community and a society that is civil and respects the rights of every person. But at the same time, we have to realize that both persons are still socialized within the same context. And one woman might say, as you heard on the thing, the clip that you played, oh, look here, man, it is a good thing when the men can tell me, say me hot. But another woman can say, no, my mother told me that when somebody tells me that, that is offensive. Is what I'm saying. So it's a question of interpretation, and the challenge also, the challenge with which we contend also is, how do you determine motive if the motive is not clearly defined? Because a receiver can say that, you know, this was his motive. How does one do that? You know what I mean? So that is where the courts come in, and that's where all the evidence would have to be weighed, I suspect. But the point is that the church's role is to re-socialize. That's part of what salvation does. It re-educates, it corrects, it reproves, it rebukes. It creates a new culture of individuals for not just for this society, but for another world to come.
Thank you, Pastor. A question has come as it relates to, is there a digital aspect to the act, such as cyberbullying? Can sexual harassment take digital form? And I will throw this to Ms. Folks. I figure this has to do with the written, visual, graphic, visual, audio harassment, as well as quid pro quo. So I leave you to speak to that, Ms. Folks, as it relates to the digital aspect. Can the sexual harassment be recognized under the act in that way?
Yes, definitely. If you if the messages are sent to you electronically, then yes, because that will be a conduct that is non-verbal, right? It's not physical, it's not verbal, it's non-verbal. So yes, if you can get sexually or you can be sexually harassed through electronic communication devices. So the quid pro quo is really in the work context where because of the overtures, the work environment becomes hostile, and quid pro quo is something for something or this for that. So basically in a context where all your employment benefits are hinged on your willingness to give into a request for sexual favors, for instance, right? And so the persistence of sexual harassment in the workplace creates a hostile work environment. And yes, it does have implications for the psychosocial health of the person, which is why the thinking is that sexual harassment has implications for even safety and health at work, because someone's mental health can decline where they're forced to be working in a situation. They need this job, but they don't want to give in to the request for the favors and what the person is pressuring them to do, right? So you have to be showing up in a space every day and defending yourself, right? Defending your bodily integrity. But you have to be there to earn a living, you know? So that's where the mental health implications are highlighted.
Thank you. And of course, you know, we are so Sister TV, if you any at all you want to come in at anything, just saying.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to add, because of the question of the cyberbullying, there is also the Cyber Crimes Act, which talks about malicious communication, which is wide enough to cover cyberbullying. And there have been a few convictions in the criminal courts in relation to acts of such malicious nature. So the sexual harassment bill talks about more of compensatory or disciplinary kind of action within an organization. But then because the question targets cyberbullying and that type of malicious communication, it also now spins itself into it there being some kind of criminal charge before the court, depending on the nature and persistency of the communication. So I just wanted to add that in there, though I know that's not the focus, but it's just because of the direct question.
No problem, no problem. We appreciate that. Pastor, along the line of quid pro quo that Ms. Folks would have mentioned just now, the person wearing quid pro quo, the person using positions of power towards seeking sexual favors from a complainant. You know, we are being real here, very real. So that suggests that there is a power imbalance, such as, you know, pastor or another church leader and the secretary. You know, what kind of, and we are being real, we are being real. What kind of feedback would you give on this matter, wherein this issue of power imbalance results in sexual harassment? How would you counsel on this matter as it relates to quid pro quo, the power imbalance regarding sexual harassment?
Well, for the most part, in a church context, I can barely see it playing out much, especially that there is little reward that anybody receives from voluntary service in the church. But I mean, a person can forfeit their office easily in the church, in the working environment where, you know, one's income,
Right. So
one's
the church
economic.
as an employer-employee
Okay, good.
aspect.
Because we have
Yeah.
institutions like schools, hospitals, and so on. Yes, that if a case comes to me of on a matter like that, certainly that's a difficult one. Because then again, it's a matter that has to be, you know, proven. You know, a matter like that warrants some kind of hard evidence. How do you prove that the employer is trying to secure sexual favors at the and should he be denied, you know, your job can be forfeited. There has to be some hard evidence on that. Of course, you can speak to the issue. You can you know, speak to the implications of that with the persons, but understanding the nature of church, you see, and how we approach things. It's a totally different institution from the average workplace. A church community is completely different. And so, whereas you find that out there in society, there is great haste in accepting what a complainant might say, in the church environment, because you're looking at the souls, both individuals, one has to be very careful how one treat with the situation. There are cases where you'll have individuals, a lecturer versus a student. Grades are hinged on, you know, providing sexual favors. You may have situations where, you know, you're not able to pay your tuition at an institution, and you are told that no problem, you can that's not a problem, as long as you come and see me regularly, we can avoid that stress. Samples like those would warrant some kind of hard evidence in order for the church as an institution to relate to it. Because as I said to you, the church, although it's within the society, it still has to factor in the societal laws. It still is a system that is governed by other ethical positions and principles that are totally opposed to what obtains in the regular workplace. So the approach has got to be cautionary, and one that, in my mind, warrants hard evidence in order to treat with the situation. Of course, you would discourage, you would speak to the implications of it, you would educate, yes, because sometimes that is needed, because sometimes an individual thinks that his approach is acceptable, because, you know, the society might make accommodation for it. But you would have to, in my mind, you know, have hard evidence in order to really, really treat with something like that. And just to close off on it, as a church, we are aware that once there is the allegation of sexual harassment in a very serious way, it falls outside of the remit of the church and now falls into the hand of the law of the land. Yes. So that is one of the areas that we that is one of the approaches that we are not able to judge on certain matters. There are limitations to how we judge on some matters, and we just make allowance. We just have to allow for the law to take its course, especially a law like this one.
All right. I hear you, Pastor. I may beg to differ on that, based on what some things Miss folks may bring shortly in terms of the approach to take in terms of what the law stipulates when there are allegations and when there's a complaint, the approach to take. We're going to get to that very shortly. So the church, it would suggest under the act has a role to play, and we are going to define that very clearly shortly as it relates to consent in terms of marital rape and so, which we're going to get to shortly. That might be another matter, but in the Sexual Harassment Act, Ms. Folks, we'll draw on her shortly for to bring the clarity as to what the law says the church can do when there is a complaint. So we're going to get to that shortly. But here's this question, Ms. Folks. If a party or a church member or worker is not the direct subject of the sexual harassment, but aware of same happening to a church member or a co-worker and is around it, can that outside party, based on the Sexual Harassment Act, can that outside party still make a sexual harassment complaint?
That party would not be a victim of sexual harassment, but to the extent that, you see, the law requires that employers and persons in charge of institutions take a zero tolerance approach. So whereas it's not like under the Domestic Violence Act where you can have third parties taking certain steps on behalf of a victim, if a third party brings that information to the church's attention, then based on the obligation of the church as an institution, the church would have a responsibility to follow up on that information. So the Sexual Harassment Act, it applies to employers, institutions, and persons in charge of accommodation, whether business or residential. Now, certainly the conference, the legislation is relevant to the extent that the conference is an employer in some situations. The church is a religious institution or an institution for religious instruction. And I don't know about the accommodation part and all of that, but one of the main things that the church needs to do is to have a policy, right? And this policy is...
you're going there. Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to go there because...
Right. So the clear position. So let's drop this question here now, since you have gone there, right? So let's back up so we get the clarity, because so can someone who is not the director, we're going to go to the part now.
Answer the question, you know?
Yes, get it clear for everybody. I want to make sure everybody is clear. You're saying that the person who is not the direct party, who sees his church member, his colleague being sexually harassed, can make some report of that sexual harassment under the act. That person is allowed to make a I guess they call it a toxic environment, can make a report. Is that what you're saying?
All right. So if someone observes sexual harassment taking place, right? Remember, you know, a lot of sexual harassment occurs in a dynamic where, you know, sometimes there's a power imbalance and the victim might be a bit reserved. If someone observes it in a workplace context and brings it to the attention of the employer would have an obligation to look into it. So the person is not making a formal report under the legislation, but remember, the legislation requires a zero tolerant approach. It means therefore that you have to look into complaints, whether or not that complaint is coming from the actual victim. That's what zero tolerance means. It means wherever it is, if you know somebody suggests it or whatever, you need to make sure and take positive steps to ensure it doesn't happen, it's not taking place. So that person making the complaint would not be able to access redress. There's no need for it. Redress doesn't arise. But if they raise it, then there's an obligation to look into it. The other thing about sexual harassment is that, or with any kind of matters of a sexual nature is that you have to be careful how you consider evidence, because it's usually done, it's between the two persons. And a lot of times you find that perpetrators will wait until someone is isolated to make their advance. So the fact that there are no third-party witnesses doesn't mean that there's no case. In a rape situation, it's always he said, she said. And then sometimes you might have the corroborating evidence that tells you exactly who is lying and who is telling the truth. So we have to be careful of how we look at, or we consider what we consider to be evidence in these cases. You can have direct evidence where there can be messages to show, or there might have been something that a third party might have observed, or there might be circumstantial evidence. So for instance, in a workplace, you know, because you know that your boss was inviting you out and all of these things, that you were doing good, and your PR said that, okay, you were recommended for a promotion. And then because you turned down those advances, all of a sudden, everything is going haywire, right? Then you can use those circumstances as circumstantial evidence to say that you are being made to experience detriment as a result of your resisting the advance. I also want to mention something else. So under the legislation, to access the tribunal, if it is that the institution or the workplace has mechanisms for resolving disputes, you're required to exhaust those.
Yeah, but before we go to the tribunal,
Okay.
let's look on because we want to look the specific requirements under the act that institutions, including the church, we have on board. I believe the president is still on, the president of the conference, Dr. Merrick Walker, and there Pastor Lewis is there, so he has responsibility for a flock. There are maybe other pastors and so on. So my understanding of the act is 12 months after it has come into effect, and it came into effect July 2023, July 3, there are certain responsibilities, there are certain requirements to be executed by the church. And this is where now I would love for you to speak, Ms. Forbes. What are mandates that the act imposes on institutions such as the church subsequent to it coming into effect?
All right, thanks. So institutions and workplaces are to implement an anti-sexual harassment policy within the first year of the legislation. So by the 2nd of July, 2024, those documents are to be in place. Now that document is to, the policy that is to be carried through that document is one of zero tolerance. So the document is gonna, of course, state expressly who it applies to. Now, in a church organization, I mean, it would apply not just between members, but even visitors to the church, you know? Anybody who would potentially interact in that space. It will speak to the conduct that is being prohibited, so the sexual advances. It will talk about what are the options for redress. Now, because of the setup of the legislation, it encourages parties to make use of whatever resources are available to access redress. So for instance, in the church community, I was mentioning, I read in the manual where it said, if there's an issue, you speak to the person about it, let them know that you're having an issue. And if the issue is not resolved, you get one or two witnesses and go back to them. And then if it's not resolved, then you bring it to the attention of the elders, right? And it said something about a business meeting, and then a decision can be taken, someone can be censored, or they lose their membership, and that natural justice must prevail. That is quite interesting because it really is similar to what obtains in the workplace in terms of dealing with grievances. So there's a biblical approach, right? That the biblical counsel that one must pursue. And then the church itself has a conciliation process which must be engaged. So the church cannot take a hands-off approach, because there is a process for dealing with disputes. And this is just another kind of dispute that you would have dealt with. Hold on one second. I noted that it says that one of the reasons for discipline is that there is disorderly conduct which brings reproach upon the church. So without the legislation, an act of sexual harassment could have been dealt with. But with the legislation and the fact that you have the policy in place.
If I may, Miss Folks, if I may, and I appreciate that, you know, so soon to be Sister Folks, you know, I love how you have delved into our manual, and that is very good. What I appreciated, you know, in terms of how you started and you were continuing there is you know, the absolute specifics as it relates to, and you were mentioning one, what would the church need to do before the next 12 months? You mentioned the sexual harassment policy. Is it that they need to also have a sexual harassment committee? I know you would have spoken to the manual, but is that a mandate as well, that beside the sexual harassment policy that should be instituted within any organization, including the church, any institution under the Sexual Harassment Act, should it also have a sexual harassment committee wherein these matters of sexual harassment would also go to that committee? Does the Act speak to that as well?
The Act speaks to mechanisms for redress. No, based on my understanding from what I've read in the manual, the church, the conference has a mechanism for dealing with grievances, right? So basically you're using that same mechanism. The legislation is not asking you to do anything that you haven't done before. It's just that if it is that you want to be entirely on point, you need to understand that with sexual harassment, then gender dynamics is a relevant consideration. So when you are convening your business meeting, as you call it, which in the workplace would be like a grievance hearing or a disciplinary hearing, what you might want to do, for instance, if a female is a victim, is to ensure that the elders who are part of that meeting and chairing that meeting and considering the issue, that you pay attention to your female composition, right? Because men's views and women, you know, views on certain things tend to vary. In addition to which, you also have to consider the comfort level of a victim. For instance, it's a female, right? And some female might not be comfortable talking about certain things in the presence of men. So those are some of the things that you need to be sensitive to. In the world outside of the church, you call that gender mainstreaming. It's just recognizing these little nuances when it comes on to dealing with you know, these matters that turn so much on male and female, and especially of a sexual nature. Are you following?
If I may weigh, can I weigh in a little bit here, please? And this is why
I'm gonna allow that, Pastor. I'm gonna allow that to do that. But just, you know, pointing to what I would have seen to say that, you know, part 2 and referencing the Act to say, yes, it says develop a sexual harassment policy, and it suggests that's a mandate, you know, organize awareness programs for all members, and as you rightly said, Ms. Folks, establish mechanisms to respond to cases. And part 4, it does suggest that there should, the institution should establish an anti-sexual harassment dispute settlement committee. I don't know if it would take the format of how you had mentioned, but it suggests around that line that is something that 12 months after the Act comes into place, that's something that should be considered for the institution. It's something that we could probably read through again, but it suggests along that line. Yes, go ahead, Pastor. And I think Sister Tavia, you wanted to say something? Not sure.
Yes, I was saying that that is why I was making the point. If you notice in I'm prophesying now, Sister Folks's you know, interpretation. If you notice that she mentioned the whole idea of evidence, because you still would have to contemplate evidence in treating with the situation. So that's one. Two, she mentioned that the church, I did not, because we know that we have we have mechanism for treating with grievances. But the manual literally gives samples of the kinds of grievances that the church would treat with from time to time. Under that, we wouldn't have the sexual harassment situation being singled out. And I did not anticipate that would be perceived as like any other grievance. I am interpreting that to be a serious kind of situation, more than the typical grievance that the church has to deal with. And that is why I made the point that the church is a completely different context in terms of how it treats with matters like these. The world has a more zero tolerance approach. And if we are to embrace what the law is saying, we are to treat with it with a zero tolerance approach too. So what the argument is, and what we are told most of the time, in matters have to do with sexual abuse, sexual abuse of children, things like that, the position of the church is that the law, it must be reported, and the law of the land must treat with the situation. The church itself, yes, we can sit with the parties and deal with it and so on, but we are not the kind of arbiters for matters like that. It becomes to the church now a legal matter. And for the most part, that is how we treat with matters that have to do with sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and so on.
Maybe if I can assist you, Pastor, because the matters that you are referring to insofar as sexual abuse, sexual assault, and rape, those are criminal matters that are to be reported to the police. And the church is with the requirement or the duty that once they become aware, it must be reported to the police. Sexual harassment. So it's not because of the word sexual. That doesn't mean it pushes it into being a criminal matter. Sexual harassment is talking about the interactions between individuals. It doesn't necessarily involve the actual act of sex. But if there are innuendos being made, or you're hugging me a little too close, or your body parts are rubbing on me, then I should be able to bring that to the church. If I'm an employee of the church, and the church is involved in so many institutions, not just and I'm talking about the Seventh-day Adventist Church now, it's not just involved in just the religious instructions that we do on a day-to-day basis, but there are many aspects to our church body itself. So when you talk about what are the grievances, we now as a church have to expand our grievances procedures and what is described as a grievance to talk about those kind of interactions of a sexual nature, whether just the innuendos, the statements, the boy, sister, don't you looking good today? Can I get a talk? Those kind of things, if that is a repeated thing I have to deal with on a Wednesday night service, a Sunday night service, a Sabbath, or a text message. The church now, it is coming from a church brother, my elder, my pastor. Then those things now I should be able to come to the church to say, hey, this is my grievance, intervene. Now I want to make it clear, because you see, it seems to be thinking that the conversation seems to be going along the line that once there is a complaint, it is a fait accompli that a brother is going, or sister is going to be found, I'm going to say guilty, but that there has been such an action. What the church is to do is to convene a tribunal for there to be an investigation. Just as how you would do any other grievance procedure in terms of a labor-related matter, or even if two church brethren are just having a problem that we say, don't take it to the law, take it to the Lord. And so the church intervenes in those kind of grievances. So I just wanted to just say, the use of the word sexual don't necessarily mean that we're having sex or that kind of thing. It's just the innuendos, the interactions. You spoke earlier about the evolving of the sideway hug, those kind of things. Once there's something repeated in nature that is making a church member, a student, etc., feeling uncomfortable and insofar as quid pro quos, as Kadria has pointed to earlier. So I just want to get that clarity out there.
Thank you very much. Right. So it's very important, right? So sexual harassment is really a civil matter. You're looking to get money, you're getting damages, you're getting, you sue somebody, that's the extent. So it's less about criminal charges being laid. It's about a civil redress. I would have said that at the outset for the sexual harassment. So that aspect of the law is saying, I feel undone by what you have said, by the way you look at me, by the way you relate to me. And so I am going to seek redress this way, not for you. I mean, there are aspects in terms of being locked up, but it's really about you paying money. And we get into that right away. The marital rape, which we are going to run to very shortly, Itavia. I know we spent a long time on this. So, Kadria, as with any institution, you know, we want the clarity on this. So as Tavia would have mentioned just now, there are certain mandates that the church has to do, and we would have said the sexual harassment policy. Having the committee would help to deal with the sexual harassment issue as well, you know. And so if none of these are done, if none of these are put in, if none is put in place, right? Is there a response, as with any institution recognized under the Act? Can a complaint be made against the church? So someone would have experienced sexual harassment. Can a complaint be made against the church? And there is no sexual harassment policy in place. There has been no education of the members. Can the church be taken to a tribunal towards paying a penalty for that? Is there a response that is required of the church on the premise of them not implementing the measures stipulated by the Act? What can come to the church if they don't implement the measures stipulated by the Act?
Okay. Yeah, so the Act says that if the employer or the person in charge of the institution does not put in place the anti-sexual harassment policy within a year, then if someone makes a complaint to the tribunal, then the institution employer can be liable to pay a sum of up to $1 million on summary conviction. So the tribunal will make the finding of fact that, you know, it's not in place, you have not complied. But summary conviction means there's going to be a referral process to the parish courts for that fine to be imposed. And also the fact that there's no policy in place does not prevent redress for an aggrieved party, because the law says that if there's no internal mechanism to deal with the issue, then the person can directly make a complaint to the tribunal. But I just want to highlight that the internal procedures is very important. So which is why where the church has something in place to deal with grievances already, you can use that. The tribunal is not asking you to go out of your way and do anything extra. If you are resourced to do something else and have, say, for instance, a lawyer on the panel and all of that, you know, then you can go ahead and do that. But if you have a mechanism in place, as long as natural justice is part of that process, it will be satisfactory, right? And so that process can be engaged with a view to resolving. And if the aggrieved is not satisfied, then they can make a complaint to the tribunal. And the tribunal, of course, can award compensation. And just to know that the compensation, the damages is at large, meaning there is no upper limit to how much a tribunal can award. The tribunal is able to consider aggravating circumstances. So if a victim is humiliated, you know, that can increase the amount of compensation they have to get. Also, the tribunal where, for instance, a worker has lost their job as a result of this fallout, the tribunal can order reinstatement. The tribunal can also say a case has not been made out, it's frivolous and vexatious, in which case no action will be taken, unless it can be shown that someone was malicious.
Wow, wow. So the individual would be liable, the church could be liable. Lots of implications there. Lots of implications here. Thank you very much for that clarity. And last question, Ms. Folk. Ms. Folks. Well, you mentioned the channels already, the channels of reporting. You mentioned they could go to the church, they could go to the tribunal. But and you would have spoken, well, you basically would have spoken to penalties under the Sexual Harassment Act. So just one last one. Can a married spouse be in breach of this Sexual Harassment Act? And if so, how so? So a couple, Tavia laughing at me.
Listen, all right. So let me tell you. So that's quite interesting because the things that are restricted, the conduct that's restricted in terms of sexual harassment that's unwelcome, are the things that should be welcome in the marital context, right? But if, for instance, there's an issue and there's a breakdown in the marital relationship, then you might have a problem. So yeah, yes, it depends on the context. If it's a situation where the relationship is broken, you know, and someone is still pursuing you as if things are good and all of that, then you can have allegations of harassment. For instance, you know, the couple work at the same place and the marriage has broken down. So when things were good, the wife seeing the husband 10 times to the day was fine, right? Him coming to her desk to look in her eyes and all these things. But then because there's an issue, which brings us to another thing about how it is to manage these relationships in any context. Because when things are good enough, things are good and no problem. But then after that, you're going to hear as an employer that you're liable because you didn't prevent this. When the two persons were having a consensual relationship that broke down. And here it is that Mr. Employer and church is in the middle of all of this. So the answer is yes.
Thank you so much. That was comprehensive as it relates to the Sexual Harassment Act. We're going to dive right into the into marital rape. But let me read a couple posts. So Worship Media said sadism was interpreted as love thanks to me. Thanks to Wilson Wounds. All right. And further, my Tassi said, would a church be held liable if they fail to deal with harassment from one of its members' officers? Well, I think we would have spoken to that just now on the premise that if a policy is not in place, then it certainly would lend to the church becoming liable. And you are asking if the church failed to deal with harassment. Well, I'll defer to Ms. Folks, but I presume that the party who didn't get the redress could always go to the tribunal if they aren't afforded some redress at the workplace, because if the policy is not in place, then it would have implications for liability to the church. But if it is in place and things didn't, and it wasn't taken up, I guess the person could go to the tribunal for redress. Any further position on that, Ms. Folks?
Just to confirm what you have said, because remember, you know, the legislation expressly imposes a duty to take active, positive steps on an employer and a person in charge of an institution. And so in terms of complying at the most basic level, you need to have a policy in place. Say, for instance, it's a small institution and they don't have enough people for a panel to have an internal hearing. Then there is provision for the aggrieved to go directly. But you cannot not do anything. having received a complaint as a person in charge of an institution or an employer, because that will make you run afoul of the legislation and be charged up to $1 million. $1
million, right? And I'm sure we have lots of stuff to do in evangelism with that money instead of spending it otherwise. So, you know, worship leader says, can a woman complain to the church about an abusive ex-husband who continue to call, although you have indicated you are not interested in being contacted? I would say, without pastor even mentioning anything, yes. Can a woman complain to the church about an abusive ex-husband? Yes. If the person is a member, I presume that there could be conversations with that ex-husband to some counseling could happen as it relates to that. So yes, worship leader, I'm sure that could happen. Now we may be going a bit over, maybe about 15 minutes or so, because we definitely want to cover this issue of marital rape. So see with us. This is where the ticklish one comes in. So thank you, Miss Forbes, and stay on, because there might be time for even 1 or 2 more questions that persons may throw. But let me get straight to Ms. Dunn as it relates to marital rape. Jamaica ratified the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, 1984, and ratified the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention, Punishment, and Eradication of Violence Against Women on December 14, 2005. What are some of the laws, or what is legal protection aimed at providing protection as well as geared at engendering accountability as it relates to sexual offenses?
Right. So firstly, let me now say good night. And I must commend the Committed Husbands Committee, as well as the conference and the church, for its willingness to take on these 2 ticklish topics. Even some of the comments I'm seeing, you know, it underscores the cultural mindset as it comes to sexual acts within Jamaica, and even more so within marriage. So under the Jamaican law, with respect to sexual offenses, we have a Sexual Offences Act that came into effect in 2009 that covers a wide variety of sexual grooming of children, sexual acts in relation to women, not just rape, but sexual assault. Okay.
Right,
You're muted.
thank you. And of course, I know, right, and I know you would have mentioned as well. I know you probably, you know, I guess in interest of time, you know, there's the Constitution in a broad way would speak along that line, the Domestic Violence Act.
So let me just say, the Domestic Violence Act doesn't necessarily cover sex.
Actually, right.
It actually covers actions, whether it be text messages, telephone calls, voice notes, physical acts of violence, emotional violence, physical acts of abuse, emotional abuse of a spouse. So that's gender neutral. So it's not just of women, etc. In comparison to where we talk about the ticklish topic, I'm calling it ticklish, of marital rape, and insofar as the definition of rape.
Yeah, right. Well, fair, right, because the domestic will more speak to the protection orders also or occupation to stop them. All right. So as we go on, how does the law define marital rape? Right? I'm sure many persons are here. That is something that they would have been waiting to hear. Right? Okay. How does the law define marital rape?
So before I get to the definition of marital rape, let us define rape. So rape is a man having sexual intercourse with a woman without her consent, or having reckless regard or disregard as to whether in fact she is consenting. So, and sexual intercourse has its own definition, which is penetration of the vagina by the penis. But also so we have to get the definition of
that
rape
a man
itself.
cannot be raped.
A man
So
can
a
be
man cannot
sexually
be-
assaulted because rape, the definition is a man commits the
Sorry,
act
I
of rape.
just trying to get as granular as possible person.
So as granular as possible.
Yes.
So because what rape is considered the action of the man, sexual intercourse by the man with a woman without her consent, or having disregard or reckless disregard as to whether or not she is in fact consenting. So now we put it in the marital rape context. I should point out, before 2009, marital rape was not a consideration under our law. So when the Sexual Offences Act came into effect in 2011, marital rape now became a husband having sexual intercourse with his wife without her consent, or having reckless regard as to whether or not she is consenting. And it comes about now in 5 situations, 5 circumstances. One is that you are.
So pause there, Sister Tavia.
Sorry.
This is the essence now. That rape within marriage, as it relates to consent regarding sex, it's only recognized with these 5 exceptions, which Sister Tavia will speak to.
Right.
Outside of that, no. So go ahead, Sister Tavia.
Well, I just want to say presently, because there's discussion afoot to change that. But
say again.
No, I said I just want to say presently the 5 circumstances. There are plans afoot. There are discussions being held by a parliamentary committee to just make rape within the context of marriage absolutely a criminal offense. So at present, the 5 contexts are: 1, the parties are separated, and separation has a specific definition. And I just want to point out that under our law, it's called the Matrimonial Causes Act. Separation is defined as parties living separated and living separate and apart for a period of a minimum of 12 months. Now, our case law, because here in Jamaica, we have the legislation, which are acts of parliament, and then you have case law by our judges in our courts. So the case law says separation doesn't have to mean that one part, a physical separation. 1, you can live in the same home and be separated. In fact, there are cases which say you can still lie in the same bed and be separated, because separation is not based on a physical separation. It is about when a party to the marriage, or both parties to the marriage, their mind has stopped being in the marriage. A very artificial thing, because you have to be looking at the state of mind, the intention of the person, etc. So there's that period of 12 months. Another one is that there's a written separation agreement. So we've agreed we're going to separate. We've decided what the separation date is. We've also said what is to happen if we're separated. The third one is where divorce proceedings have started, or an application has been made to declare a marriage a nullity. And one of the bases for declaring a marriage a nullity is that bigamy. Sorry? All right. The other one is where, for example, under Domestic Violence Act, or even under the Matrimonial Causes Act, the court has made an order or granted what we call an injunction, restraining or prohibiting a husband from cohabiting with his wife, molesting the wife, or removing him from the matrimonial home for the wife's personal protection. And the 5th one is that the husband knows he is suffering from a sexually transmitted disease. So if those 5 circumstances exist, and a man, and it's not all 5 together, it is or. So if any one of those 5 circumstances exist, then if there's sex, if a husband has sex with his wife without her consent, or without having regard for whether or not, or is reckless as to the question or whether or not she's consenting, then he can be charged and convicted upon the evidence with the crime of rape.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a very strong one. Pastor, I have to bring you in right now because with all that, what is the church's position on consent in rape? You know, it is
consent in marriage.
Consent in marriage. My consent in marriage, you know. Can there really be rape in a marriage? Isn't it implicit? Sexual consent implicit. Once you come together, the two becomes one. Does a husband need his wife's consent to have sex with her? Can a wife to her husband say no to sex? Do you have any scriptural, doctrinal, spirit of prophecy references, Pastor? Because, you know, I know this is a ticklish one, so I put it to you.
All right, let me see if I can be heard. Okay, definitely, the Bible has a reference in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where the Bible talks about, it argues that we should not defraud one the other, except it be by consent. So the Bible encourages that in a marital context, you should give due diligence and allow for each person to freely share in that consensual sexual situation. However, the Bible also makes implied in the text is that there can be separation. It says, except it be that the person is saying, if the person is saying we're going to do fasting and prayer, you can have separation, and in situations like that, it's by consent that you're not participating in the act. The truth is that I concur with the legal experts that the whole matter of sex without one's consent is not something that is done in love. That's not love. And marriage survives and thrives in the context of love. As a church community, however, we encourage healthy marriages. And a part of that healthy marriage is the whole idea of, the sexual act. When I'm doing counseling sessions, premarital counseling sessions, sex obviously becomes one of the subject matters. And there are individuals, there are females who don't like the idea of sex, but they want to be engaged in a marital situation, a marital relationship. They want a marital relationship, but they don't like the sex aspect. We don't want to talk about that. They don't want to be engaged in that. Usually in a context like that, I would discourage that that you continue with this marital process because it really doesn't make sense. According to scripture, marriage involves that act. And the truth is, I don't know how the world and the legal experts define marriage, but a part of the definition of marriage would involve that. The Bible says the two shall become one flesh, according to Genesis chapter 2. So if it is that the 5 things mentioned earlier, the breakdown, the separation, all of those things, then a fragile, fractured relationship warrants counseling at that time. That wouldn't warrant trying to pursue the person sexually. The first thing is to try and resolve that matter. If the relationship is falling apart, that's the first move you should make, seeking to resolve the situation. If the person doesn't want to resolve it, then that sounds like it's going towards dissolving. And so on the situations
right,
like those,
so right here, that's what Pastor. Let me jump right here.
yes.
You are saying, so let me ask you, right? And I'm asking this because there are always people who are not necessarily a part of the church. So I'm putting this to you. If you have a victim of a marital rape, what would the counsel be? Leave the marriage, stay in the marriage? How would you go about relating to someone who's a victim of marital rape?
Well, as I was listening to the attorney on this matter about marital rape is a crime. That's what the last thing I heard her say. She says it's a crime. Now, the question is, how does the church treat with a criminal action? Yes? If according to Jamaican law, it's a crime, then the church has to report a crime. Notwithstanding that, the church, however, has the responsibility of seeking to interpret what the complainant is saying, seeking to understand what is being said, and counsel against it, in the sense that, you know, if the persons are prepared to take counseling session because they want to resolve the marriage, because if somebody's saying that there's a marital rape, it's clear that there's a breakdown in the marriage. If they don't want to reconcile, then we encourage separation. But the church is not hasty in encouraging a divorce, but separation for a period of time to allow for healing and at the same time be having counseling, going on to allow for healing. But if the attorney is informing us that marital rape is a crime and that is reported to us as marital rape, then one, if that husband has to, if it is determined, then the husband has to experience disciplinary action. If he has offices in the church, he will have to be relieved of those offices. And also his membership becomes in question if that situation has taken place. And of course, that would be the determination.
I would want to think subsequent to the court coming to play, and not necessarily before. No, I'm saying subsequent to, and the attorney can respond, but I presume that innocent until proven guilty. So even if there's a complaint, I would presume that the court would come into play wherein a decision would be made, not on being charged, because it doesn't rest with the police. You know, decisions in terms of those matters would rest with the court taking a position based on what is presented to them. So
if I may, I actually would say that what the church can do is have a discussion insofar as asking to, can I just say, step down from active duties pending the outcome of any charge.
Which is what I was about to say.
Right.
You don't have to be proven, as long as your repute comes into question. Yes, we ask that you be relieved temporarily from your posts, or another form of disciplinary action is censorship, which means that you are relieved, your membership status is put on a kind of hold for about 6 months while the matter is being attended to in the courts or otherwise. But once your repute has come into question, then the church usually recommend that you step down. You're relieved of your right to vote, to make decisions in the church. Like at our regular business meetings, you're not allowed to vote when you're on censorship or discipline. But you can still frequent church, you still come to church, but your standing in church is provisional at that time, pending the outcome of the situation, because your repute is in question. And if your repute is in question, it doesn't order well for the institution at all.
You're adding, Sister Tavian?
Well, I just wanted to clarify in relation to what Pastor said previously insofar as the marital rape, because as I said earlier, the present situation under the law is that it's only considered marital rape in those 5 circumstances that I outlined earlier. With the discussions being had by the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee in relation to a review of the Sexual Offences Act, any sexual a man having sexual intercourse with a woman, whether or not she is his wife, without her consent, or is reckless in regard as to her consent, will now become a criminal offense. The truth of the matter is, we are now bucking the trend insofar as societal norms. I mean, I did see a comment earlier about, I think if I can look at it, it's in the chat, where Kings Ellis says, according to what scripture said in relation to husband and wife, how could you then apply sexual arrangements? And the church is going to have to take its part in, I believe, educating our members insofar as that kind, readjusting thinking insofar as the biblical interpretations, the education, and changing what our societal norms are and views in that regard, so as to aid in avoiding situations of that. We do see, as family law practitioners, we do see where sex is used as a method of violence insofar as, so a woman may find herself not in any of the 5 situations, but because she's in a relationship where there is domestic violence, one such act is sex. I can't call it rape because it's not considered rape under the law, but it's sex. She now has to consider whether or not she's going before the court for protection order, an injunction to prevent the husband. And certainly that she can't go before the court in relation to anything that took place before that order. It is only if it comes after. Any sexual act without her consent, sexual intercourse, without her consent after that order has been made. So there have been cases before the court, as I said, where the main thrust of the complaint of domestic violence is the sexual act.
Yes, thank you. And as you rightly said, Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith is looking to, is trying to,
No, I don't want you to put it that way. Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith heads the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee. Right? So it's not anything she's spearheading herself.
Right, but she heads the Joint Select Committee, and she has position on it. And basically, while the Act registers the 5 positions now, so until that comes in, which could be a year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever it is, the current position is that the 5 exceptions is how marital rape is recognized. But with the push, the thrust is for that quote unquote protection for married men be removed, if you want to say that once there is sex without consent, it is just like if you are not married. So that's the understanding of the thrust that is being looked on with the Joint Select Committee. So yes. What is the penalty for marital rape?
So the penalty for rape.
And before I may say that, there may be, and while we may not have the time to discuss it, there may be some men who may say that women may seek to be vindictive and say the man did X, Y, Z in the marriage, and somewhat the burden of proof is going to rest on the perpetrator.
So let me answer you firstly insofar as what is the penalty. It's a minimum of 15 years to life imprisonment. Right? I mean, there's a possibility of parole after 10 years, but the conviction, the penalty, as stated by the Sexual Offences Act, is life imprisonment or a minimum of 15 years. With regards to persons being vindictive, I should point out that the burden actually lies on the complainant to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's the standard for any criminal charge, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Kadria earlier would have spoken to the nature of the evidence that's led. Now, it has long been accepted at law that sex or sex without consent rape is not something that invites third-party witnesses. So you may look at if a report is made to the police shortly thereafter, a visit to a doctor, a complaint made to a friend within a short period of time after. So that is the but the burden actually is on the complainant insofar as the proving beyond a reasonable doubt, and the complainant would be the female.
Okay. Thank you, and I'm smiling because I see someone put in the chat, what if the husband coerces her? Okay, by withholding, I was interpreting differently, by withholding or threatening to withhold financial support. Okay. I thought it was, yes.
Well, one of the things is that what they do look at, and I should have pointed out, you look more insofar as determining whether or not there is consent. If you threaten physical assault to the wife or a third party, so suppose you say you're going to beat the children if you don't have sex with me, that can be said, or you're going to harm yourself. Well, not yourself, but children, a parent, someone close to the wife or the wife herself, then that would be a situation where there's no consent. Another one is false and fraudulent representation as to the nature of the act or the identity of the person doing the offense. So the fact that you're going to be doing what I call negotiation transactional sex may very well not fall right now within the definition. Because if you're going to say, I'm not going to maintain if you don't have sex with me, that per se wouldn't fall under the whole determining whether or not there is consent. But we may see what changes are being made to the law at a later date.
Absolutely, and that is section 5, subsection 2 of the Sexual Offences Act. What an evening. We have come right down. I think we have covered everything.
Goldberg, sorry, but before you curtail the evening,
yes,
I just think that there are some things to consider.
Yes.
And you see, because of how sin has operated in our world and the degradation and decay of the human mind, one toward the other, the things that God has erected that are wholesome and healthy for the human existence and for human happiness are now bordering on becoming threatened by laws in a bid to curb unfortunate behaviors and antisocial behaviors. And so what we're going to find happening, already we've seen in the Gleaner that individuals, the marriage rate has plummeted. And I'm going to literally prophesy that it's going to get worse as this act and the whole, the act of sexual abuse and marital rape is being ventilated. What we're going to find is that more and more we're going to have a decline in individuals seeking, marriage as, the supreme expression of relationship, and are just going to start resorting to reckless living. And I pray the Lord comes before that. And that is not to say that the law is not seeking to work in the best interest of human beings. But I'm simply saying, as a result of how decadent we're becoming, laws have to be imposed that will make what was once a pure and happy situation become something that threatens human relationship.
You see, if I may say, Pastor, because one of the things that we have seen is so far as it's because of societal norms as it presently is, insofar as unfortunately, I mean, despite and I don't really want to make this feminism approach. But the unfortunate thing is that what we have seen so far, insofar as sociological things and the decline in the rate of marriage, is it's because there are these I say unregulated, but I don't want to, that's not the word I want to use. It is the whole, if I want to have a better term, to use your term, the degradation of what is the concept of marriage and how marriage is to operate, that has really and truly led to the decline in marriage. So I think we want to bear that in mind. And because we do have disenfranchised women at present who are looking at, because they are in marriages, whether to go back to the scenario, that the question that was placed to Brother Goldberg, if you don't have sex with me, I'm not going to maintain the children. There's the economic side to it all. And so you're finding that women are the subject of various acts of domestic violence without there being sufficient recourse for them.
Right, but the answer still rests with God. So if we put our trust and our faith and we look to our Savior, who was the solution to everything, but the thing is, sometimes we deviate and look otherwise. So regardless the laws that are there, Jesus Christ is to whom we ought to look. He is the author and the finisher. He is who we should look to. And so we have come to the end of the evening. Sister Tavia, basically that was a summary. I know Pastor just gave his. Is folks on board, you want to just give a summary of what you want us to leave with this evening?
Okay, no problem. So the takeaway from this evening is that there is this new legal space in which we're being asked to operate in our different spheres of life. The church is not accepted, and that when it comes to sexual harassment, even though as a culture we are, I want to say desensitized, we're a little bit more tolerant, we have to become aware of where the world is going and where this, the level at which this legislation is requiring us to engage with each other. And so in terms of the obligations that we have in terms of conduct at work, at church, at school, we have to bear in mind the fact that, how we engage with people, we have to ensure it's not about offending them, but we have to be more, you need to exercise a level of emotional intelligence then. So gone are the days when you can just express yourself and say what you want and you're a guy to a girl or a girl to a guy, it's okay. No, you have to be now engaging people in such a way where you're gauging how they're receiving what you're saying and taking the relevant social cues to say, okay, this is not being received, let me just move on. So that is the main thing I want us to take away in terms of what is expected of us and how our conduct is supposed to be affected. But just to say to the church that the church is not accepted, the church is required to have a sexual harassment policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Forbes. And you took the words out of my mouth. Based on how this legislation is set up, we have to exercise good emotional intelligence, and we ask that of the men, and definitely we ask that of the women as well. See to some extent with some of the men and the culture that they would have come from in terms of their approach to pursue women, and men, you need to understand and grow as well. So emotional intelligence, we need to exercise same, and just approach each other with love. Love conquers all. Love in the marriage will mean if there's love, you're not going to want to abuse, and love will mean each of us will give freely to the other. That's what I was saying. There will be no wanting, there will be no issues, but you will be enjoying each other as God would want us to do. It is an evening well spent. I think this will be there for posterity. Persons can go back to this, learn more about this legislation, which is very important. And, you know, in so doing, we will educate ourselves to a better understanding of it. The church, there are requirements of the church. Dr. Walker may still be on. We are saying he's hearing the information now from the experts on what is required. Thank you, Ms. Forbes. Thank you, Ms. Dunn. Thank you, Pastor Lewis. We really appreciate. And so I'll just hand over to Baron Anderson to just do a final close and prayer. Sorry, and thank you to those on YouTube as well.
Am I on? I'm not sure.
Yes, hearing you loud and clear.
So while I was looking at Garfield, but boy, this was an interesting piece of discussion. You know, many still have issues with ascertaining what constitutes sexual harassment, and the process of making a report showed an incident occur. But as a result, some have been sexually harassed and would have decided to ignore it. That is what I have observed. And to those who decided that this conversation was necessary, we say thanks. Thanks to Garfield. Thanks to Sister Tavia Dunn. Thanks to Kadria Folks, Pastor Lewis, very insightful. Nye Brown, I know you work in the background, Pastor Adrian Johnson, and especially to our experts. Let me just reiterate, because they did the heavy lifting this evening, Tavia and Kadria. Hope I pronounce Kadria correct. I was corrected that pronunciation. To the two persons behind the scenes who navigated the technical side, we say thanks to you as well. You know, I'll say this, that the workplace and the church space have done regular sensitization exercises, but despite these sessions, there is still sexual harassment happening in our world. Now that we have a better view of how to proceed, this is absolutely necessary, I think, because there are those who honestly are harassed and they really honestly do feel helpless. I feel like things are about to get a little bit of a shaking up. I also think wisdom should be applied in all things. I like Garfield's closing thoughts as it relates to love should be emphasized despite the law. You know, I just can't wait for the education of the wider populace as it relates to this topic, and a greater understanding of the concepts. You know, thanks to all those who contributed and those who came on and supported and accepted the invitation to participate, whether you were on panel or whether you heard it on YouTube, and whether you're hearing it now or whether you hear it after this. We just hope that the impact of the conversation that we just have will not just stop here, but it will continue. And so the conversation continues. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let us bow our heads for prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for the ability to come together like this and to have discussions of this nature. We want to thank you for the openness in which the conversations were had, for those who were feeling helpless on the various aspects of harassment, that they can at least now see a way in which they can get some help. We ask you, Father, to continue to be with each individual who contributed tonight, be with their families, continue to give them that selfless approach and the willingness to share, and they will continue to do so. Forgive us of our sins now, and as we separate one from another, we ask you to continue to be with us, continue in helping us in exercising the love and having a knowledge, and that knowledge should be of you and what you want from us. Continue to guide and protect. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. And that's it from me.
Yeah, good night, everyone. Time to close. Right.
Who started this journey? Me and you. And I gave you my promise to be true. When traveling on this pathway, things won't always be smooth. But I give my reassurance, I'm devoted to you. Committed man, that's who I am. Committed man, ain't no changing this union. It is God's plan. Through sickness and health, I will be content. Committed man. When there is conflict, won't leave my side. I will be faithful every day of my life. When traveling on this pathway, things won't always be smooth. But I give my reassurance, I'm devoted to you. Committed man, that's who I am. Committed man, ain't no changing this union. It is God's plan. Through sickness and health, I will be content. Committed man. Through sickness and health, I will be content.